This is the Parkinson's Podcast, brought to you by the Davis-Phinney Foundation. What follows is the full, unedited audio from a Live Well Today webinar, shared as it was originally presented. We hope you enjoy it.
Hello, everybody. I'm Chris Kruger, Senior Manager for Content with the Davis-Phinney Foundation, and welcome to this month's Live Well Today webinar. This month, we're fortunate to feature Daniel Corcos, one of the leaders in research involving exercise and Parkinson's. And today we're going to discuss the latest developments in understanding how exercise impacts Parkinson's. And if we're lucky, and I think we probably can get there, we may even be able to tease out some tips from Dr. Corcos about how those of us living with Parkinson's can get the most from our exercise. So without further ado, Dr. Corcos, can you tell our audience about your background and experience in Parkinson's and what drew you to work with people with Parkinson's?
First of all, Chris, I'd like to thank you very much for the honor and privilege of being able to talk today, and also to thank the Davis-Phinney Foundation for all the tremendous work they do on behalf of people with Parkinson's. I received my PhD in 1982, and I studied limb movements for the early part of my career. I was very interested in how the brain tells muscles to go from one place to another. And at that point, I had no interest. I was interested in disease, but I was trying to answer relatively basic questions on normal, healthy people. And I published many articles like this, and I was then given the opportunity in 1994 to take a sabbatical in England, and I decided I would go to England to study Parkinson's disease because a very famous neurologist, C.D. Marsden, was in England, and a very famous neurophysiologist, John Rothwell. So I went there to work with them, and whilst I was there, we published several papers showing that people with Parkinson's disease become quite weak when they are off levodopa, dopamine medicine. And since the effect here is since this happens very quickly, it's obvious that this is because of changes in the brain causing the weakness, as opposed to muscle atrophy or just losing strength over time. I then came back and conducted a clinical trial on strength training, which was published in 2013, showing the benefits of strength training. I was asked with my colleagues at the time to do a study on endurance exercise, and so we put together a study on endurance exercise. And so for the last 30 years, my career has been dedicated to Parkinson's disease. It is also the case that my aunt and uncle, my uncle was in the Air Force, served in the Philippines in the 1950s. In the Philippines in the 50s, when you went to bed and slept at night, you would spray your bed with DDT and have a mosquito net. My aunt and uncle both attribute their Parkinson's disease to pesticides. And if you read at the moment, there is growing evidence that one contributory cause to Parkinson's disease is pesticide. And currently, the three things I really do is I conduct research, I talk to doctor of physical therapy students, I give them lectures, giving them the latest information on how to help people, and I enjoy very much talking to people with Parkinson's disease, either in a Zoom format here or live and in person.
So I think I just heard you say we're all going to get our doctor of physical therapy after this call. Is that right?
You can certainly try. Certainly, maybe little d, little p, little t.
Okay, fair enough. So, Dr. Corcos, thanks for the introduction. I didn't know that you had Parkinson's in your family with your aunt and uncle, and we hear a lot about people who have been exposed to pesticides, and of course, there's a lot of news about that. We do have some resources on our website about environmental exposures and Parkinson's, so we can put that link in the chat, and we'll also include it in the description of the video when we release the recording here. So while I want to do what we said we would do in the subject of this webinar and talk about the latest developments in research, I know there's a lot of things that people, there's big questions. So maybe we can start with a couple big questions, and maybe we can start with this one first. Do we know today whether exercise definitively slows progression of Parkinson's. What do we know about that? Can you say a little bit about that?
We have very, very strong evidence that high intensity endurance exercise, that is exercising with your heart rate elevated to perhaps 80 to 85% of your peak heart rate, does slow the rate of disease progression. We've had 3 studies, all of which have showed the same finding. For those of you who are interested in looking up papers, there's a paper, the first author is Schenkman. I'm the last author, 2018, in JAMA Neurology. It's been cited a lot of times, and that shows strong evidence in favor of the idea that high-intensity heart rate exercise slows disease progression. My colleagues in Holland did a wonderful study. The lead author there is Van der Kolk in 2019, and they show very similar findings. And Margaret Mack in Hong Kong published a paper in 2021. And what's important to notice is that these studies all have relatively large samples, and the findings are very, very similar. And so I would encourage all 464 of you listening in and all 2,000 of you who eventually come to watch it to try high-intensity endurance exercise. So the worst that will happen is it doesn't slow disease progression, but it still has so many other terrific benefits with very few side effects that you have nothing to lose. Now, in 2029, we will publish the results of my phase 3 clinical trial. This is a large study. It has 185 people in each treatment arm, and we will directly compare exercising at 60 to 65% peak heart rate with 80 to 85% peak heart rate. And if that study is significant, if there's a difference between the 2 treatment arms, such that the higher heart rate slows the rate at which the disease progresses, that will be quite close to definitive proof. It will be really nice. It would be really nice if we also can get a biological marker of that. So in that study, we are looking at the DAT scan, which is a dopamine transporter scan. We will be looking at how dopamine binds. And if we find that there is less reduction in that group, the high intensity group, that would be great. I think I'm trying to talk and pick up questions. So let me explain what you should all be doing. What you should be trying to do is you warm up for 5 minutes. I'm going to talk about a treadmill, but you can do this on many devices. Treadmills easiest to talk about because they're easiest to come by. You can just put one in your basement. This is like you can put a bicycle in your basement. You warm up for 5 minutes, and then you take your peak heart rate, which you can either get from a formula or you have it measured. We can talk about that later in the presentation. If your peak heart rate is 150, you take 80% of that, that's 120, and you hold 120 beats of your heart for 30 minutes. You cool down, and you do that 4 times a week. The exercise prescription is all laid out for you in a paper of which I am the lead author. It's in Journal of Parkinson's Disease, 2024. Go to PubMed or Google, and it's written by myself and 3 movement disorder specialists. So the 4 of us wrote the paper. The prescription is all written out there. For some of you for whom I'm speaking a foreign language, and I don't mean my English accent, I simply mean all of these words are a foreign language. If you go to personal trainer, or if you go to the YMCA, or you can go online, or you can come join my Zoom group, which meets monthly, and we talk about this all the time.
So can I ask another question that came out of the chat? What do we what if I mean, what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask you to share something about another article you recently published, maybe about a cardiopulmonary test that can help you understand your capacity. Because I think that's one of the questions people have. What if I can't get to that? What if I can't do this because of advanced Parkinson's or I have some other cardiac issue? Obviously, if you have a cardiac issue, talk to your doctor. But what you recently published something, Dr. Corcos, about a cardiopulmonary exercise stress test, or something to that effect. Can you explain that?
Yes. So in 2016, the American Heart Association published an article that they recommend that everybody gets a cardiopulmonary exercise test. And you get two things from a cardiopulmonary exercise test. One, you get your peak oxygen consumption. It's called VO2 peak. It's your ability to transport oxygen. And when your VO2 peak becomes low, this is very bad. It's argued that this is the best measure or best index of, in fact, a person's disability. If you have a low VO2 peak, putting it very simply, if you go to the shopping mall with your grandkids, you won't be able to keep up with them. And that's no fun. It's also very bad for your health. And so knowing one's VO2 peak is important. And that came out of the American Heart Association. The other thing that you get from a cardiopulmonary exercise test is your peak heart rate. Now, the formulas that you'll read about in books, etc., have a degree of inaccuracy, and that inaccuracy is exacerbated in about 30% of people with Parkinson's disease. So if you're 70, your peak heart rate from a formula, 220 minus 70 is 150, but then people whose peak heart rate will be 110. And we go through this in this 2025 paper very, very carefully. And there's a supplement in it in which we tested a person who we knew their peak heart rate was going to be very low. And in fact, their peak heart rate was going to be very low. Now, the fact the heart rate is low doesn't actually matter too much, because what matters is that you know it, and then you work at 85% of the peak heart rate you have. So even if you're 30 beats lower than the age predicted formula, it just means the age predicted formula doesn't apply to you, and it doesn't apply to you because you have some elevated form of autonomic dysfunction, which occurs in a high percentage of people with Parkinson's. And so we wrote this paper because my goal, so right now I'm coming to the end of the first half of my career. The first half of my career was to do relatively basic lab-oriented research. The second half of my career is to work with the public. And so the idea is over the next several years is to throw out really good ideas and then try to work with the system to enable people to get cardiopulmonary exercise tests. You can get them several places. Cardiology will do it. Pulmonology will do it. You can also go to many, many health clubs, which will give you a cardiopulmonary exercise test. So essentially what you do is you go on a bike or a treadmill. Treadmill's better. And every 2 minutes, they make you walk a little faster and a little steeper until your heart rate is the maximum that you can do and until you saturate your oxygen uptake. The test doesn't take very long, but those two pieces of information can then guide how you put together the exercise program for you. We are doing this with people in Salt Lake City. We have a program there where the patients see my colleague, Dr. McKee, and then they have it set up that they can have a test in pulmonology. They get their VO2 peak, they get their peak heart rate, and then physical therapists at Salt Lake City give the person with Parkinson's disease a very targeted prescription. And I think what we're going to find over the forthcoming future is that this is all part of personalized medicine. For some people, a simple formula may work. For other people, you need a test, and that test is then highly prescriptive, and then you are doing the best that you can do.
So we had a couple questions. Thanks for that information about the test. And I think I think you just mentioned one place where there's an ongoing program that's going to help people devise an exercise program. But that can happen with your personal physical therapist or your personal trainer, so long as you can get the statistics about your own performance. And I think an important takeaway from what you just said was that 80 to 85 heart rate max is not so significant in a general sense. It's important for the individual's understanding about their own circumstances with regards to their heart rate maximum performance.
Now, to be clear, the 80 to 85% is the constant. Okay, what the cardiopulmonary exercise test gives you is your personal maximum. Mm-hmm. And so we've got two papers, showing that as long as you exercise at 80 to 85% of your personal maximum, you will benefit from high-intensity cardio exercise.
So I want to drill in, if we can, to what high-intensity, I think people sometimes conflate high-intensity cardio exercise with high-intensity interval training sometimes. So that's a type of exercise, right? High-intensity interval training would be something like, tell me if I'm right about this, would be something like sprinting for a minute and then walking for 30 seconds and then sprinting for 2 minutes and walking for 30, so you're interrupting your sort of high intensity with a lower intensity. Is that a basic understanding of what high intensity interval training would be?
Yes.
But that is not what you're talking about when you say high intensity cardio exercise. That you don't have to be doing something in an interval fashion. You could be just keeping your heart rate at a high level.
I'll go through this very slowly because people either don't understand, or many people do understand, but they then want to go and do what they want to do as opposed to what the literature shows. The 3 studies I showed you and I talked about, the person holds their heart rate at 80 to 85% for 30 minutes. So if you follow my hand, the heart goes up and it's steady. It's steady for the 30 minutes, and then you have 5 minutes of cool down. There is no heart rate going up and down, up and down. You can do a 30-minute exercise session in which you do 2 minutes easy, 1 minute very hard, 2 minutes easy, 1 minute very hard. And these are what interval sessions are. Interval sessions is where you have a rest period, which you can either drop the heart a lot or you just drop it a little bit. So you could imagine that you do 75% for a minute and then go to 85% for a minute and 75%. There are many ways to do interval training. The bottom line is there have not been large-scale studies on interval training showing the same benefit. So I can tell you as a scientist that the 3 studies that have shown disease progression have all held the heart rate constant. They haven't done intervals. Now, may you get the same effect? That would take another study. Are there benefits to intervals? For sure. For those of you who are coaches or athletes, you will see that cyclists and runners do lots of interval training, and it's a good way to get your VO2 peak up. But I can only tell you what the papers show. There are papers showing benefits. There are papers showing benefits of interval training, but not at the level of disease modification. And again, I'm not saying that it can't happen. I'm not saying that at all. I do interval training. I love doing interval training. I did my bike workout yesterday, and I did 2 minutes easy and 1 minute hard. 2 minutes easy, 1 minute hard. You get very different biological changes by doing interval training. But there is no study yet to show that.
So now you're pointing to, I think, the next place I wanted to go with. This is the next big question I wanted to ask. We're still in the very first part of this conversation where I said we were going to talk about some big questions. And the next one is there, in your opinion, a best exercise for people with Parkinson's? And this comes out of a question, or this relates to a question that was just in the chat, which is, what about the recommendation of 150 minutes of exercise a week? I think that's maybe from the American Academy of Physical Therapy, or maybe that's the Parkinson's Foundation recommendations. But can you say if there's a best exercise, and maybe comment also about the duration of exercise you think is backed by research?
150 minutes comes from the CDC, it comes from the World Health Organization, and that is just a time. So there's no question that doing 150 minutes of exercise is good for you. And if everybody in the world did 150 minutes of exercise, we'd have a much, much healthier population than we do now. So I want to be clear that for those of you who read about 150 minutes of exercise, it's good. But it doesn't tell you necessarily what to do. And when you go and look at those recommendations, you'll find that they've, over decades, looked at when the exercise is done at a higher intensity, it is good. For those of you who are really interested, you should go and look at the American College of Sports Medicine edition 12, which has just come out. There's a whole section on Parkinson's disease that I wrote, and that gets very, very much into the weeds, if you like. But the idea of finding a best exercise is not the way to look at it. It's just not the way to look at it, okay? The way to look at it is as follows. If your goal is to slow down your disease, if that is one of your goals, okay, then you need to be doing high intensity endurance exercise, because that is those are the only studies which have given promise to that. There are no drug studies. They've tried disease modification since 1987. There is no drug study. So if that's your goal, that's what you need to do. Keep your heart rate up high. That is 1/4 of the exercise prescription. You should think of exercise a little bit like diet. You need fat, you need protein, you need carbohydrate, you need vitamins, or vitamins, my apologies. You need it all, and you need it in balance. The second thing you need to be doing is weight training. If you are on a bicycle getting your cardio, you are not strengthening your bones. Elite cyclists can have bones which are very porous because the bike is bearing their weight. They have no load bearing. So it is really important, especially for women, especially for postmenopausal women, especially if you have a tendency towards osteoporosis. Resistance training is good for bones, it's good for muscles, it's good for cognition, it's just good. When you have Parkinson's disease, one of its cardinal signs is rigidity. Okay? A layperson's term may be stiffness. You just feel stiff. Stretching, balance, yoga, Tai Chi, anything to keep you range of motion is very good. That's the third part of the prescription. And then the fourth part, which is really hard to do alone, but agility training, multitasking, working with a group of people as they do in boxing, or going to a group class. At my gym every Sunday morning, there's an agility boot camp. And here you're working on balance and coordination. And these things are important because you don't want to fall over.
So we have a couple questions that have been asked about pedaling for Parkinson's, which is a Davis Phinney Foundation program. And I want to plug quickly that the Davis Phinney Foundation's program, Pedaling for Parkinson's, can incorporate some of the community elements you were just describing, but it can also incorporate some of the dual task work that is useful in the sense of different motions you can make while you're on the bike, but also in terms of some of the cognitive exercise that can improve agility in a different sense than what you were just referring to. Do you have any other thoughts, though, about pedaling for Parkinson's that you can share?
Well, given that I am on Davis Phinney right now, it would be not very clever of me to say it wasn't great, okay? But I'm not going to say anything I don't believe, and pedaling for Parkinson's is great. It is a terrific program, and I think it's in many, many places. And those who do pedaling for Parkinson's disease, I'm sure you benefit from it. I think one of the questions one can always ask is, at what heart rate is the instructor that you're working with targeting for you? And my suggestion would be that you talk to whoever the instructor is, or you just do it yourself, and that you target for yourself a high heart rate.
Yes, so just for people who may not be aware, the Pedaling for Parkinson's program is about RPMs. That's the metric, a little bit more than heart rate. However, you can hit an RPM rate and also track your heart rate, which I think is what you're just referring to, Dr. Corcos. Is that right? The RPMs that you're pedaling is irrelevant to your heart rate, but you can connect them and increase the intensity of your ride to get your heart rate a little higher. Is that what you're suggesting?
So I want to be very clear, especially for those of you who have a level of expertise. The brains behind the cycling, and he's got some wonderful publications on this, is Jay Alberts. So if you go and read Jay Alberts' work, you'll find several papers showing clear, striking benefits of cycling. And that I agree with. I think Jay and I agree on what I'm going to say next, but I do have a slightly different emphasis, okay? Because people with Parkinson's disease are generally a little bit slower, and also because if you look at the rate at which elite cyclists pedal, they tend to pedal at a high rate. That is called cadence. And so when you are cycling, if you can hold your cadence at about 90 RPM, everybody would agree that would be good. So I don't want to confuse people here. When you're on your bike, and if you're holding your cadence at 90 RPM, that is great. If you're producing no watts, no power, and if your heart rate is low, then the likelihood of that exercise being in any way disease modification is very low. And there's no evidence that it would be good for you. Okay? So for those of you who are into the cycling part, having a high cadence is great. But a high cadence with a low heart rate, and where this becomes difficult for those of you who cycle, is for some people, myself included, if I'm going to get my heart rate high, because I'm a fairly big kind of cyclist, I actually cycle at a lower rate because I can't reach the cadence of 90 at the kind of watts that I need to produce. So cycling is complicated. But to keep it simple, pedal at 90 RPM, get your heart rate to 80 to 85%, and it's absolutely terrific for you.
Yeah, so one of the things that's interesting for me personally, and I hadn't mentioned this at the start, but I live with Parkinson's myself. And one of the things that's interesting for me about cycling is when I get off a bike, if I've been pedaling at a high RPM, the next day, and I feel like I move a little quicker. And I think that's the benefit I receive from cycling, is that I feel more, it's not agility. I just personally feel like I get a little bit more, I'll say pep in my step, where I just got a little more speed available to me. So that's what I get from that. And maybe that's some of the reason we see some benefits from the pedaling exercise, regardless of if you get your heart rate up. But I guess what you're saying is getting both of those things combined is really where the magic is most likely to occur.
Yes. And I think what's very important for you all to understand, this is a very complicated idea. So if you take a person with Parkinson's and you take them off their medication and now you put them on their medication, they are better. They have, to use Chris's term, a pep in their step. And what one has done here is one has changed the signs and symptoms of the person. And as soon as you take the medication away, they've gone back to how they were. The same is true for deep brain stimulation. You turn your stimulator off, your signs and symptoms get worse. Just so we're clear, a sign is what a physician looks at. A symptom is what you tell the physician you have. And so what Chris mentioned with his cycling at the high cadence, he has a pep later in the day, the following day. That is a symptom change, okay? There's been no evidence yet from the cycling at a particular cadence that is disease modifying. Now, Jay and I are very good friends. When we designed SPARX-3, we are measuring the cadence of the treadmill, how fast it's going, and we are measuring the incline. And if at the end of the day, we find that people who walked faster, but at a lower incline, have better disease modification than those who just used incline, then that would support the cadence hypothesis. But at the moment, there's no study published showing benefits of high cadence for disease modification.
So thanks for clarifying this. I appreciate how careful you're being in describing these circumstances and the way different types of exercise are known at present to impact Parkinson's. I want to move on to the next part of our conversation. We've talked about some of the research that has been ongoing as you've described some of these big questions and answered some of these big questions, but I want to look at a couple other pieces of some recent research that came out. Before we get there, though, I just want to note that some people have been asking about different types of exercise in the chat, and I want to say that we're going to be publishing some information about different types of exercise, including table tennis or ping pong, in the next couple of days. Sometime next week, we're going to be publishing some infographics about some benefits that you might receive from different types of exercise, and that's going to be a series we're going to release. So you'll have some more information coming out from the Davis-Phinney Foundation about that sort of question very soon. I also think
I can very quickly comment, okay? I'm a fan of all activity, okay? So I've got a lot of friends who are very, very passionate about ping pong. I spoke to a terrific physician in New York. He calls it neuropong because he thinks that the brain is involved. All these forms of activity are really good. And doing what you enjoy is really good. But you need to ask yourself, why are you doing it? Okay? If you're doing it to improve your coordination, if you're doing it to improve your balance, if you're playing ping pong to have a great time with your partner and the two people opposite you, if you're playing doubles, there are many reasons to do it. I think it's very important that one knows why one's doing it and why one has a complete balance. So if I had Parkinson's disease, I would be doing ping pong. I'd certainly be going out and dancing. But I would also be doing, which is also my own current bread and butter, is my continuous high heart rate exercise.
So the variation is not variation, but doing multiple things is an important component for people with Parkinson's. There's no one cure-all in terms. That's a loaded way to say that, but you get what I'm getting at. You see where I'm pointing, just to say the variety of activity can be helpful to address different impacts of Parkinson's.
Absolutely. I mean, you're going to have for those of you who eat meat, if you have a steak, a potato, a couple of green vegetables, and a side salad, there are reasons for all of that. And to think that just the steak is going to take you through life is probably not advisable.
So that's a fun image you're just crafting in my mind what is the stake on the plate if what exercise corresponds with stake? Well, I'm gonna have to think about that. We'll maybe make something with that out of that in the future. But I want to jump to uh, ask you a question about a study that came out last year from Yale, and this study from Yale found improvements in imaging results after rigorous exercise regimen. And I'm just wondering if you can comment on that study. What did it involve? What did the investigators find? And what can we take away from it as people with Parkinson's?
What you can take, if you want the answer first, okay, everything that I've just told you is true. Okay, now I'll explain why that is. If you go and look at the paper and you go and look at the appendix, you will find that the people there did high heart rate activity. So it's a group out of Connecticut. They are terrific. It's a group of people who organize exercise for people with Parkinson's disease, and they do circuit training. Circuit training is terrific. So you can imagine that you're doing a weight exercise, and then you run over to another station when you do another weight exercise for another set of muscle groups. And as you're running around from station to station to station, working different muscle groups, you're keeping your heart rate elevated. And so this study, the heart rate was elevated. They show the heart rate. And then they had 10 people. They had no control group. They said they had 10 people, and they did a PET scan on the people. And they also did a neuromelanin scan. And what they learned from the PET scan, where they use a radioactive tracer, that the dopamine binding potential increased over the time course of the exercise. So there's been more dopamine coming out of the neurons. And that is good. That's very similar to what I hope happens when we use a DAT scan in our study, that there's either an increase or the rate of decline is lessened. So that is a biological reason to believe that the exercises that you do at high intensity heart rate are having some change in the underlying biology of the dopaminergic neurons which reside in substantia nigra pars compacta. There's also a deficiency in iron, and that's why they did a neuromelanin scan. And so there was an increase in the neuromelanin. Now, it's only 10 people, and if you read the end of their study, they will tell you that there's need for more research, and there is need for more research, but this study is very promising and will be one of the first studies we cite if we produce the same findings with that scan in our much, much larger sample with 2 groups.
So this study was a small study. It had 10 people. They found imaging results that showed that better increased dopamine activity in the brain was occurring after the exercise. And I think I heard you say that they were hitting heart rates that are similar to the ones you were talking about earlier. Is that a fair summary?
Perfect.
So I think people got really excited about that, and it's important to just note that the size of the study suggests that maybe it's not conclusive, but it is another piece of evidence that's important and significant to the goal of knowing what exactly happens when we exercise at a high intensity and we have Parkinson's. So that's it's another drop in the bucket, and the bucket's getting fuller all the time, I think is a fair way to say that. Is that acceptable?
Yes.
Great. So another thing we hear about pretty frequently, actually, at the foundation is questions about Irisin. I'll admit I don't know much about this, so I'd love it if you can give us a big picture overview. What is Irisin? How does it work in the body? And what is the reason this comes up for people with Parkinson's? What research has been done?
Well, Irisin isn't my particular area of strength. So I'm going to strongly recommend those of you who really want to understand Irisin in great detail. There is a terrific talk by Professor Ted Dawson from Johns Hopkins. And if you Google Ted Dawson, Irisin, and Parkinson's Society, British Columbia, you will find a 50-minute tutorial. So this is a hormone. It's released from muscle and it circulates through the body. We have written a paper which will be published in the mid-2025, where we go through and discuss irisin in some detail. There's only one study that has been done on humans with Parkinson's disease. It was done for 12 weeks, and there was a slight increase in irisin. If anybody has a particular question later on about why they're particularly interested in irisin, we can discuss that. More generally speaking, and you're going to get this in the paper that we've written, the lead author is Luthra, Luthra, should be out September, October. When you when you have Parkinson's disease, many of your blood biomarkers are different. They're either higher or lower than a healthy person. And so we have an endocrine system, which is very important. There are things like cortisol. We have an inflammatory system where you have measures like CRP. And then we have a neurotrophic and neuroprotective system. And irisin comes in under the neurotrophic, neuroprotective. And so what happens is, if a measure is elevated, like C-reactive protein because of inflammation, it is elevated in Parkinson's. It becomes more elevated with disease progression, and it is reduced with exercise. And so irisin is probably reduced in people with Parkinson's disease, and we have one study showing that it has been increased. But beyond that, it's not really clear at the moment how helpful the knowledge of irisin will be to people in 2025. If you listen to the wonderful talk by Dr. Dawson, there are people doing work to try to find ways of providing irisin safely to people. I think he argued that it was still 2 years away, and that was if you go online, you can probably find, and I did find, there are people who will sell you irisin. You have to make your own judgment whether that's a good way to spend your money. The one thing we know for certain about exercise is it upregulates and downregulates biomarkers. It upregulates and downregulates genes in a biologically safe way to do it. You don't end up with kind of toxicity from too much of one or too much of the other. So for those of you who read about irisin, Irisin is how you spell it, the best way to regulate it is to do endurance exercise and resistance exercise. It is a myokine, so it gets released when your muscles do work. And the fact that there are 25 biomarkers that do respond to exercise gives one an inkling why it's so hard to find drugs, because exercise hits lots and lots of targets. It hits the neuroendocrine system, neuroinflammatory system, neurotrophic system, all in one go. You don't need 20 different pills, each one targeting part of it.
Yeah, that's a good. I appreciate that observation. That exercise it's like a cocktail of medications all on its own, is what I think you're suggesting. Is that a way to summarize what you just said?
It is a spectacularly good cocktail. And unlike cocktails, where if you have too many, there may be adverse events, you can certainly have 2 or 3 exercise sessions and they'll all be good for you.
Well, I've never had one too many cocktails myself, so I don't know what you're talking about. So we just got a question in the chat about climbing, and I think that might relate to another question I want to ask you. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about climbing related to Parkinson's, rock climbing, that is. And I think maybe I'll spin that into a second question, the follow-up on that. which is I find that when I look in my local area, there's all these studies at the physical therapy school in town where I live, and I know this happens in other places too, about exergaming, where they're using certain tools in the clinic to sort of they're either virtual reality oriented, or they're using a screen to help you encourage yourself to go harder or faster on a treadmill, for example. And I find that for myself, I do climb as an intervention for Parkinson's and also for fun. And I find that that's what I get out of it. It's a game for me. I have to choose where I'm going to put my hands next, and I have to engage in a way that I wouldn't if I was just going on a run, because of the way climbing works. You have to sort of find your path. So I'm wondering if you can comment on rock climbing as an intervention for Parkinson's, and then how that relates to the sort of, maybe it's a dual task thing or just the general exergaming idea.
I think it's all very good for one. And I think when you start to get, so the question is why one is doing it. If it's for enjoyment, I think that is terrific. And exergaming and things like that are very enjoyable. But some of these activities, like the climbing and finding the right part to put your hand, and the coordination part, really plays into the fact that for me and the people I talk to, the part of Parkinson's which may be the single most important part is cognition. Now, there are some figures that up to 80% of people get dementia with Parkinson's. I think those figures come from a while ago, and I think there's a lot one can do. And so for those of you who have Parkinson's, I would not assume that 80% of people get Parkinson's. I certainly am around people who've had the disease for many, many years, and they are very, very sharp. But I do think that's all the more reason to keep the mind active. Rock climbing, especially if you decide to have no support, certainly focuses the attention. I wouldn't suggest that to anybody. I think one should be very, very well supported. And I think one has a chance to do it with friends sometimes. The exergaming, I think, is great. Bas Bloom in Holland has done some work in this area. I happen to love on my bike. So, by the way, I'm a big fan of Davis Phinney, the person, the cyclist, his wife. I'm a cyclist. I love Zwift. I love nothing more, which is a form of exergaming. I love nothing more than coming over Tower Bridge, London, turning left and going down the embankment. And I love nothing more than sprinting through London on Zwift. I also happen, for those of you who do use Zwift, I also happen to like Wattopia, which of course comes from the idea that your job on a cycle is to produce watts. So it's very important to kind of focus on the kind of social cognitive involvement. And so those activities are very good. And then the other thing is, to do what you're going to do for the rest of your life is very important. And so if one enjoys activities, it's good to do them, but it's also good to remember that certain activities have biological advantages over others, and to understand that in some detail.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the time and I'm realizing how fast this hour has gone by, and we have a lot of questions that we were planning to address, and then many more questions that came in through the chat. So I feel like we're a little bit up against the wall here, and I want to jump to a question.
I'll tell you what, in that case, we'll do what one does on a bike. We'll take a break and we'll come back in a week, a month, or a year, and we can do part two. This will also give people a chance to have thought about it, and yeah. So I think we've got about 7 or 8 minutes. So
you look at, I don't know if everyone can see this, but that comment just got a ton of response on the screen, and a lot of thumbs up and applause. So I think your idea is officially endorsed by the audience.
I think that is great. And I can tell you, I can only talk for myself. I mean, I'm at the point in life where declining cognition is something that I certainly think about. And so making sure I do things which minimize the likelihood of it occurring are very close to my heart.
Well, thank you for being a part of this community and for offering all your expertise. It's really great to speak with you whenever I get the chance. I love to do it. I wonder if we can get to two more things before we wrap for today.
We can.
The first thing I'm wondering if we can talk about is just there's so many splashes on that happen with this new development in Parkinson's. You hear these things. Would you have any recommendations for how we can drill in and separate the sort of, and well, just determine what's the real deal? How do we know when something is worth following up on? We hear about boxing, we hear about all these other interventions we can try. How can we sift through the morass and find the best information?
It's hard, but the things we talk about in the 2024 paper, these are principles that have been developed over 20, 30 plus years. I'd be very, very careful with new fads and certainly look at the evidence. I go and talk to groups of people with Parkinson's, and people will come up and ask me, well, should I do this? Should I do that? And my answer more often than not is no, because somebody is asking you for a lot of money for something for which there's no clear evidence base that it will help you. Everything I've told you here, everything that is in the publication will undoubtedly help you. Just be very careful. If something sounds too good to be true, it is too good to be true. And that's certainly the case in Parkinson's disease. We are making progress. We're getting better at giving people slight tweaks in medication. There are changes in deep brain stimulation. The exercise prescription is being refined, but it is a relatively slow and methodical and rigorous process. And be very, very careful, especially if you're handing out money. If you're not handing out money, you just go and try something. And if it works for you, it's brilliant. I mean, if somebody just says, I've got this great exercise routine and it works for me, and you try it and it works for you, that's great. Just be careful when somebody says, I've got this great new bike for you. It's going to do wonderful things for you. We're going to charge you $2,500, and you can't find any support for that particular bike created in a particular way is going to help you.
Well, thanks for that information. I'm going to follow up on what you just said in a moment, but I'm actually going to try to sneak one extra question in real quick. We have had a bunch of people asking in the chat about whether you said 4 times a week. Is more better? Is it always better to do more, or would you ever caution against that?
I would absolutely caution against it. More is not always better. The first thing to do is to absolutely listen to your body. Okay. And if you're getting tired and if you're not responding, then take a break. And we're all different. So your sleep is very important. Your mastering of stress, anxiety to the extent that you can is very important. More is not always better. And some of you do have addictive personalities. And I've also been through the more is better on my bike, and it often isn't. And there's no evidence you're not going to get a much bigger return if you do 5, 6, 7 sessions. If you enjoy them, that's great. That's great. But don't think that if that 4 times 30 minutes is good, that 8 times 30 minutes is better, and 12 times 30 minutes is better still. That is wrong. And you could end up doing yourself considerable harm.
Thank you for that. The wisdom in that is important to drive home at the end of this webinar. But the last question I wanted to ask you is, we both know a man named Louis Geiser, and I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about Lou and share some wisdom from Lou.
Well, Lou is a good friend of mine and his wife, Genevieve. And Lou, I think he's now 88, and he's been listening to me now for 4 or 5 years, and he lives out in California, and he follows the exercise prescription religiously when he can. He occasionally has had a fall, but this is one of these things where you're best off recovering from the fall, and keep going. He's 88 years old, and I would still put Lou up against any lawyer in California. He's a very gifted lawyer. He's doing very well. He follows the exercise prescription, and he's 100% determined to live his life to the fullest that he can.
So if I asked Lou today, Lou, how do you stick with the exercise regimen when it gets hard? You're 88 years old. I'm only 42, and I have a hard time keeping up with it sometimes. So what do you think Lou would say if I asked him that?
It's very interesting. I was interviewed in Utah. You can find it, May the 3rd, Channel 5, and you will see there a person with Parkinson's disease interviewed. And he says, I found it very hard. I'm not one who likes exercise, but I do feel a lot better. And I think what Lou will tell you is it's just good for him. And so he does it. You can put it. The only difference between exercise and a pill is it takes you 5 seconds to pop the pill, and it takes you 2 hours a week to do your exercise. But the effects are the same. And in fact, if you talk to my movement disorder specialist colleagues, they will tell you when they talk to their patients, they often tell them to take the medication so that they can exercise. It really is putting exercise first and foremost. And my colleague in Utah puts exercise first and foremost for her patients and is working very hard to provide the environment. I'm not going to lie to anybody because you all know it. It's not easy. Going out and exercising is not everybody's cup of tea. As you get older, it gets harder. As you get aches and pains. But we haven't talked about swimming. For those of you with aches and pains, and I get them, lower back, knees, whatever, a nice swimming pool can be very, very cathartic for you.
I've recently started swimming as a main exercise modality for me. And first of all, my heart rate is definitely getting to the 80% maximum every single time. It takes me one lap and I get there. And that's been great for me personally. And I know a lot of people would say the same thing. So I think maybe what I would expect Lou to say is, you got to do it because when you do it, you're going to feel better. And that's true for me, at least. And I hope it's true for others in the audience. And I just want to wrap up by saying thanks again, Dr. Corcos, for sharing your time and your expertise and being so careful and attentive to all of our questions in the audience. And I hope we'll be able to get you back on this call again sometime in the future to answer some of these other questions. And anything else you think we should have talked about that we didn't? Any last words?
No, I think judging by all the questions, this is complicated stuff. So let's meet soon. Let's have another Zoom and let's go through all the questions and we'll work our way through them one by one.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Corcos. I'll look forward to talking with you again very soon. And thanks for being here in the audience today. Our next Live Well Today webinar is June 13th with psychologist Roseanne Dopkin, and we'll talk about managing some of the relationship challenges of Parkinson's. Roseanne is a prominent, Dopkin is a prominent psychologist who's done a ton of research in therapy for Parkinson's. So we'll look forward to seeing you for that one in June. And thanks again, Dr. Corcos. I'll see you soon.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Parkinson's Podcast. For more information about the Davis-Phinney Foundation and to learn about educational offerings and community events for people affected by Parkinson's, please visit davisfinneyfoundation.org or dpf.org. This content includes information, insights, and opinions from our Parkinson's community. The views expressed are those of individual participants and do not constitute medical advice. This content is not intended to substitute for the guidance, advice, or recommendations of your personal healthcare providers.